my daughter said. I sold your house to pay my husband's debts. I just smiled. The day my daughter told me I was homeless, she was wearing a new dress. That is the thing I remember most. Not her words. Not the look on her face. Not even the sound of the door, my door, the door I had painted blue with my own 2 hands 23 years ago, being opened by someone who acted like it had always been theirs. I remember the dress. Yellow with small white flowers, the kind of dress you wear when you are celebrating something, when you feel like you have won. Her name is Miriam, and she was smiling at me the way a stranger smiles, polite, distant, like I was someone she had never owed anything to. Like I was not the woman who had held her through every storm of her life. Like I was not the reason she was standing at all. I had just come back from 3 months away. 3 months of traveling to places I never asked to go, eating food I never asked for, sleeping in hotels that smelled like other people's lives. 3 months of calling my daughter every few days while she told me to relax, to enjoy myself, to stop worrying. 3 months of that uneasy feeling sitting in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. And when the cab stopped in front of my house on that Tuesday afternoon, when I looked out the window at the home where I had buried my grief and raised my child and whispered my prayers into the walls, the first thing I saw was the sold sign. Big. Red. Planted in my garden like a flag of conquest. My key did not turn in the lock. They had changed it while I was gone. I rang the bell. I waited. I heard footsteps inside. My floors, my footsteps, the same creak on the 3rd board near the entry that I had been meaning to fix for 15 years. The door swung open, and there was Miriam, in her yellow dress with the white flowers, and behind her stood her husband, Solomon, with his arms crossed and his eyes full of something I can only describe as a man who has just placed a bet and watched it win. "Mama," she said, "you're back early." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Come inside." Not even the smallest flicker of guilt behind her eyes. Just, "You're back early." Like I was the problem. Then Solomon stepped forward, and he said the words I will hear in my sleep until the day I leave this earth. "We sold the house, Mama Ruth. It wasn't a choice. I owed money. Dangerous money. And this was the only way." So, he spread his hands like a man explaining something simple to someone slow. "So, you don't live here anymore." I looked at my daughter. She looked at the floor. And I smiled. "I want you to understand something. I am not a woman who smiles when she is happy. I am a woman who smiles when she knows something the other person does not. When she has already seen the end of the road, they think they are still traveling. My mother was the same way. Her mother before her. There is a particular kind of smile that belongs to women who have been underestimated. Women who have been left in the cold and discovered, to everyone's surprise, that they did not freeze. That was the smile on my face standing at my own front door, locked out of my own home, looking at my daughter in her celebration dress. Solomon saw it and stopped talking. Miriam finally looked up. "Why are you smiling?" she asked. Her voice had a crack in it. Just small. Just enough. I did not answer. I simply looked at both of them for one long moment, the way you look at something before you set it down for the last time. Then I picked up my bag, turned around, and walked back toward the street. I heard Solomon say behind me, "She doesn't know anything. She's just an old woman." I kept walking. He was wrong about both things. But that is a story that takes time to tell, and some stories cannot be rushed. So let me go back, all the way back to the beginning, to where the love was still real, and the house was still mine, and my daughter was still the little girl who used to sit on my lap during thunderstorms and tell me that as long as I was there, she was not afraid of anything. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Ruth Abigail Manoah. I am 67 years old. I was born in a small town where the roads were red dirt and the churches were the tallest buildings. And my mother raised 5 children on a teacher's wage and the kind of faith that does not negotiate with hard times. We were not rich. We were not even close to rich. But we never missed a meal, and we never missed a Sunday, and my mother always said the same thing when we complained about what we didn't have. God gives the seed to the one who will plant it, not the one who will eat it alone. I planted. My whole life I planted. I met my husband, Ezekiel Manoah, when I was 24 years old. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full. Full of thought, full of care, full of a kind of love that doesn't say much because it doesn't need to. He worked in construction. I worked in a school, teaching children to read words they would carry all their lives. We were not trying to become wealthy. We were just two people building a small, honest life, brick by brick, the only way we knew how. We bought the house when Miriam was 2 years old. It took us 6 years to save for it. 6 years of saying no to things, of mending clothes instead of buying new ones, of packing lunch every single day, of choosing the house over everything else the world was selling. When we finally signed the papers, Ezekiel lifted me off the ground in the parking lot of the notary's office and spun me in a circle while the secretary watched from the window, probably thinking we had lost our minds. We hadn't lost our minds. We had found our home. We painted every room ourselves. Ezekiel painted the kitchen yellow, Miriam's favorite color even then, when she was barely old enough to have favorites. I painted the bedroom a deep, quiet blue, the color of water at dusk, the color that helped me breathe. We planted a garden in the front, nothing fancy, just roses and a lemon tree that Ezekiel's mother gave us from her own yard, wrapped in newspaper and carried 3 hours on a bus. That lemon tree grew taller than the fence. It was still there when I came back from my trip and found the sold sign in the ground. Miriam was born with her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which is not always a kind combination. She was bright from the beginning, the kind of child who asks why before they ask what, who reads instructions and then does things differently anyway, who wins arguments at 8 years old with logic, so clean you almost don't notice she has wrapped it around your throat. I was proud of her. Every single day, I was proud of her. Ezekiel died when Miriam was 19. A stroke, sudden and silent, in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday. He was at work. His colleague said he sat down, put his hand to the back of his neck, and was gone before the ambulance arrived. No warning. No goodbye. Just the one morning we had coffee together, and then never again. I want to tell you that I was strong, that I held it together for Miriam, for the house, for the life we had built. And I was. I did. But strength is not the absence of breaking. It is the decision to keep going after you have broken, and some mornings it cost me everything I had just to open my eyes and put my feet on the floor and start again. Miriam was my reason. She was the only reason I needed. I worked 2 jobs for the next 3 years to keep the house, to keep her in university, to keep the lights on and the lemon tree watered. I cleaned offices in the evenings after teaching all day. I never told her how tired I was. I never let her see me cry, not because I wasn't crying, but because she had enough to carry with losing her father. I decided, without anyone telling me to, that my pain was mine and her future was mine to protect. She graduated. Business administration, honors, a yellow dress at the ceremony. She has always loved yellow dresses, and I sat in the crowd and cried the tears I had been saving for 4 years. Happy tears. Ezekiel tears. I felt him beside me the whole time. I know that sounds like the kind of thing people say, but I mean it the way I mean few things. I felt him. I felt his pride like a hand on my shoulder. Then she met Solomon. Solomon Dathan arrived in my daughter's life the way certain storms arrive. Bright on the horizon, moving fast, impossible to look away from. He was handsome in that specific way that makes you forget to ask questions. He dressed like money, talked like money, laughed like a man who has never had to count anything. He had a job in finance, a car that was newer than our house, and a way of looking at Miriam like she was the most important thing in any room they walked into. I tried to love him. I genuinely tried. But there was something in the way his eyes moved when he was in my house. Not looking at the walls or the family photographs or the lemon tree through the window the way a person looks at the home of someone they love. Looking at the square footage. Looking at the structure. Looking at the value. I said nothing because Miriam was happy, and I had spent enough of my life being right about things that brought me no joy. They married 2 years after meeting. A beautiful wedding, more expensive than I was comfortable with, paid for entirely by Solomon, who waved away every offer I made with a smile and said, "I've got this, Mama Ruth. You've done enough." I remember standing at the reception watching my daughter dance, yellow dress again, laughing at something her new husband whispered in her ear, and thinking, please let me be wrong about him. Please let this be love and not something wearing love's face. I went home that night and sat in Ezekiel's old chair by the window and talked to him the way I always did after something big. I told him what I'd seen. I told him what I felt. The house was very quiet. The lemon tree moved in the wind outside. He didn't answer. He never answers. But the quiet itself felt like something. Like a man who knows the answer but loves you too much to say it before you're ready to hear. The first years of their marriage were fine. Miriam visited often. She brought food sometimes, sat at my kitchen table the way she had since she was small, talked about her work, her friends, small things. Solomon came with her, and he was charming, and he called me Mama Ruth, and he ate my food and complimented my garden. And I kept my feelings about him folded neatly behind my smile because I did not want to be the mother who poisons her daughter's happiness. Then things began to change. It was slow. That is always how it is with the things that will hurt you most. They move slowly, so slowly that by the time you realize what is happening, so much has already gone. The visits got shorter, then less frequent. Then Miriam started looking at her phone when we talked, typing with her thumb while I spoke, saying at the wrong moments, the way you do when you are hearing someone but not listening. Solomon stopped coming in. He would park outside and send a text, ready when you are. Miriam would grab her bag and apologize with her eyes in a way she never did with her mouth. A year before the trip, she arrived at my door on a Saturday morning looking like she hadn't slept in days. I made tea. I sat across from her. I waited. Solomon lost his job, she finally said. She was staring at her cup. It wasn't his fault. There was an investigation, the company, not him. But they let some people go, and he was one of them. And while he looks for something new, things are just a little, she stopped. Difficult. How much? I asked. She looked up. What? How much does he owe? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked back down. It's not just the job, Mama. He had some investments. That didn't work out. And there are some people who, she shook her head. We're handling it. I just wanted you to know. She didn't say a number. I didn't ask again. But I watched her drive away with Solomon waiting in that shining car, and I stood at my gate by the lemon tree, and I felt that stone in my chest shift into something heavier. Something with edges. For months later is when they came to me with the idea of the trip. It was a Sunday. They sat across from me in my living room. The room where Miriam had done her homework, where we had celebrated every Christmas, where Ezekiel had sat in his chair by the window every evening reading his Bible with his glasses pushed up his nose. They sat there together, and they were smiling the same smile, and Solomon said, Mama Ruth, you deserve a rest. You have given your whole life to everyone else. Let us give something back. We want to send you on a trip. Europe. 3 months. Hotels, tours, everything paid. All you have to do is go. I looked at Miriam. She nodded, too fast, too bright. I looked at Solomon. He leaned forward with those careful, finance-trained eyes and said the word that should have sent me running. He said, and we'll just need a small thing. Just a power of attorney. Just in case anything comes up while you're away. A bill, a legal form, something with the house. Nothing major. Just so we can handle things without bothering you. Just so they could handle things. I felt every one of my 67 years in that moment. I felt Ezekiel's hand on my shoulder, or the memory of it, which is the same thing. I felt my mother's voice, that low, steady voice she used when she meant business. Ruth Abigail, God gives wisdom to those who ask for it and stay still long enough to receive it. I stayed very still. I looked at my daughter, this child I had held through every storm, this reason I had gotten out of bed for 20 years, and I asked myself the question I did not want to ask. Is she part of this? And then I asked myself the harder question. What are you going to do about it either way? I signed the power of attorney 3 days later. I packed a suitcase. I kissed my daughter on the cheek. I touched the lemon tree on my way down the path, just for a second, just with my fingertips, the way you touch something you are not sure you will see again. Miriam waved from the gate. Solomon honked the car horn, cheerful, impatient. I got in the taxi without looking back. What they did not know, what neither of them, in all their planning, had thought to wonder, was that I had been to see someone the morning before I left. Not a friend. Not a pastor. A lawyer. A very specific, very careful, very brilliant woman named Deborah Annan, who had handled my affairs since Ezekiel died, who knew every paper connected to that house, and who listened to everything I told her without blinking. I told her what I was afraid of. She told me what we could do. And we did it. The trap was already set before the plane left the ground. I just had to wait for them to walk into it. So when I came home to my blue-painted door with someone else's lock, when Miriam stood there in her yellow dress and Solomon stood behind her with his arms crossed and his winning face, when he told me I did not live there anymore, I smiled because I knew something they did not. I smiled because the house they had sold did not exist the way they thought it did. I smiled because somewhere in a file in Deborah Annan's office was a document that was about to change everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. The beginning of the end always looks like a beginning. That is the trick of it. That is why so many people miss it until it is too late. This story is not over. It has barely started. I want to tell you what Europe felt like when your heart is broken. Not the kind of broken that comes from a fight or a disappointment. The kind that comes from suspicion. The slow, quiet, terrible kind, where you are standing in front of the most beautiful things in the world, and you cannot see any of them, because something inside you is already back home, walking through your own rooms, checking behind your own doors. I arrived in London on a Thursday evening. The hotel was lovely. Miriam had arranged everything. Nice rooms, clean sheets, a window that looked out over a street full of people who had no idea who I was or what I was carrying. I sat on the edge of the bed in my good traveling clothes, and I called her, the way she had asked me to. She answered on the first ring. "Mama, you made it. How is it? How do you feel?" "I feel tired," I told her. "The flight was long. But you're okay? You're safe?" "I'm safe," I said. There was a pause. Just a small one. But I have learned, in 67 years, to listen to pauses the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. Not just for what is there, but for what is missing. "Good," she said. "Rest. We've got everything here. Don't worry about a thing. We've got everything here." I lay back on that hotel bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning I did what the tour guide told me. I visited the old buildings, the museums, the parks. I ate scones with jam at a little table by a window and watched people walk by in the rain. I took photographs I knew I would never look at again. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I oohed when the other tourists oohed. But every night, I sat on the edge of that bed and I called Deborah Annan's office and I left a message, even though her secretary always said the same thing. "She is aware, Mrs. Manoa. Everything is in motion. You will be the first to know. Everything is in motion." Those words were the only thing that let me sleep. 3 weeks into the trip, on a Wednesday morning in Paris, of all the beautiful, indifferent places in the world, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer. But some small voice that sounded like Ezekiel's quiet certainty, told me to pick up. "Ruth?" said the voice. "Ruth Manoa?" "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "My name is Naomi Kess. I used to live 2 houses down from you on Acacia Street. I don't know if you remember me. I moved away about 6 years ago. I work in property now, real estate documents, title processing." And Ruth, she stopped. She took a breath. "I saw your house come through our office today." I sat down on the edge of the Paris hotel bed. "What do you mean?" I said. My voice was very calm. That surprised even me. "It's listed for sale, Ruth. Your daughter brought the paperwork in personally 10 days ago. She has a power of attorney and she used it. The house, your house on Acacia Street, it's on the market. And there's already an offer." The room did not spin. That is what people always say. The room spun. Mine didn't. Everything became very, very still. Like the moment just before something falls and you already know you cannot catch it. "How much?" I asked. Naomi was quiet for a second. 280,000, she said. I closed my eyes. Ezekiel and I had paid 42,000 for that house. We had laughed when we signed, because 42,000 felt like a mountain we'd been climbing for years. We never imagined it would be worth what it was worth now. We never thought about it that way. It was never about the money. "Ruth, I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I should call. But I remembered how you used to bring food to my mother when she was sick. I remembered that you did that without being asked. And I could not call. I want you to picture something. I want you to picture being 67 years old, sitting alone in a hotel room in a city where no one knows your name, Thousands of miles from the house your husband carried you into on your wedding day. Thousands of miles from the lemon tree his mother gave you. Thousands of miles from every memory you have ever made. And learning that your own daughter has put a price on all of it. 280,000. That is what Miriam had decided my life was worth. I thanked Naomi. I told her she had done the right thing. I told her she was her mother's daughter, and I meant it as the highest compliment I know how to give. I hung up. Then I sat in that Paris hotel room, and I was very quiet for a very long time. I did not cry. I thought about crying. I held the possibility of it in my hands like something fragile. But when I looked inside myself for the grief, what I found instead was something colder and harder and much more useful. What I found was the memory of Deborah Annan's office, 3 weeks ago, the morning before I left. Deborah sitting across from me in that unhurried way she has, like a woman who has seen every kind of trouble and survived every single one. Listening to me with her hands folded on her desk. And saying, Ruth, if they do what you think they're going to do, I promise you they will do it into a wall. I picked up my phone again. I called Deborah. She answered before the second ring, which told me she had been waiting. They moved, I said. I know, she said. Naomi Kess called me 20 minutes ago. We have the confirmation we needed. What happens now? What happens now is that they find out what they actually sold. I felt something shift in my chest. Not joy. Not yet. Something quieter than joy. The deep, private satisfaction of a woman who planted a seed in frozen ground and is now watching the first green push up through the soil. Let me explain what Deborah and I had done. 3 weeks before I left for Europe, I had sat in her office and told her everything. The way Solomon looked at my house, the way Miriam's eyes wouldn't meet mine, the way the power of attorney had been presented to me like a small thing, a nothing thing, a formality. I told her what I feared. I told her what my body already knew even when my mind was still arguing. Deborah listened without interrupting. That is one of the things I love most about her. She does not perform listening. She actually does it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ruth, do you know what a living trust is? I knew a little. Enough to know it was different from simply owning something in your name. She explained it carefully, the way she always explains things. Not talking down, not rushing, just making sure every word lands. A living trust, she said, means the house is no longer in your personal name. It is in the name of the trust. You are the trustee. You control it completely. But when someone tries to sell a house that belongs to a trust, using a power of attorney that was signed by the individual, not the trust, the sale is not valid. The power of attorney gives them authority over Ruth Manoah. But the house no longer belongs to Ruth Manoah personally. It belongs to the Ruth Abigail Manoah Living Trust. She looked at me over her glasses. What Miriam sells, she said, will be something that no longer exists the way she thinks it does. The sale will be fraudulent. And when it is fraudulent, we do not just reverse it. We have grounds for criminal proceedings. I had sat with that for a long moment. Are you sure? I asked. Ruth, she said, I have been a property lawyer for 31 years. I have seen children take from parents. I have seen spouses steal from spouses. I have seen brothers ruin brothers. And I have spent 31 years making sure the law catches up with every single one of them. She paused. I am very sure. We transferred the house into the trust the next morning. We registered every document. We made everything legal, everything proper, everything invisible to anyone who did not know where to look. And then I packed my suitcase and got into the taxi and let Miriam wave me off from the gate as though I was just a trusting old woman going on a well-earned holiday. Let them think that. Let them think whatever makes them comfortable. Now, sitting in Paris with the phone warm in my hand and Deborah's voice telling me the trap had been walked into, I felt something I had not felt since the morning Ezekiel died, and I realized I would have to be strong in a way I had never been asked to be strong before. I felt ready. I cut the trip short. I told Miriam I was unwell, a small lie, the first lie I had ever told my daughter, which I found bitterly ironic given the circumstances. She called immediately. Her voice was too high, too fast, a woman standing very close to something she is desperately hoping you won't notice. Mama, you still have 5 weeks left. Everything is paid for. Why don't you rest a few more days and see how you feel? I want to come home, I said. But Mama. Miriam. I want to come home. Silence. I heard Solomon's voice in the background, low and urgent, too fast for me to catch the words. Then Miriam came back, her voice smoothed over like a fresh coat of paint over a crack in the wall. Okay, Mama. We'll be here when you get back. I know you will, I said. I hung up. I looked out the Paris window at the gray, gorgeous sky, at a city that had stood through centuries of things far worse than what I was carrying, and I made a decision that settled into my bones like something permanent. Like a foundation. Like $42,000 and 6 years of sacrifice and a lemon tree planted in love. I was going home, and I was going to smile. Not because things were fine, but because I had already won. They just didn't know it yet. And sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is knowing something the person standing across from you does not. I thought about Miriam's yellow dress as I packed my suitcase. I thought about the way she hadn't met my eyes. I thought about Ezekiel and the way he used to say, quietly, without drama, the way he said everything that mattered, that the truth does not need to hurry. It always arrives exactly when it is supposed to. It was arriving now. I zipped up my suitcase. I turned off the Paris hotel light. I walked out into the hallway and I did not look back. Some doors you close gently. Some you close like a full stop at the end of a sentence that took your whole life to write. And some you let them close behind you, and you walk forward, and you do not stop walking until you reach the place where everything they thought they'd taken is waiting for you, untouched, whole, and entirely yours. I was going home. If Ruth's story is living in your chest right now, if you felt something you can't quite put into words, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. It costs you nothing and means everything to us. The flight home was the longest 11 hours of my life. Not because of turbulence. Not because of the crying baby 3 rows back, or the man beside me who fell asleep on my shoulder before we even left the runway, or the food that tasted like cardboard wrapped in foil and called itself a meal. It was long because of what was waiting at the other end of it. Because with every hour that passed, with every mile that disappeared beneath the clouds, I was getting closer to the moment I had been preparing for. And no matter how ready your mind is, your heart is always a little behind. I did not sleep. I could not. I sat in that window seat with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked out at the darkness above the ocean, and I thought about Miriam. Not the Miriam who opened the door in the yellow dress. Not the Miriam who let Solomon speak for her while she looked at the floor. I thought about the other one. The real one. The one I made. I thought about the night she was born. 38 hours of labor, which I remind you is not something a woman forgets, not in this life or the next. I thought about the first time she called me Mama, so clearly, so deliberately, like a child who had been practicing the word in secret and finally decided the moment was right. I thought about the time she was 7 years old and a boy in her class said something cruel to her, and she came home with her chin up but her eyes full, and she sat at the kitchen table, and I made her hot chocolate, and she told me the whole story, and then said, Mama, why do people say mean things to people they don't even know? And I told her, sometimes people are carrying pain they don't know how to put down, so they hand it to whoever is closest. She had nodded very seriously, the way she did when something landed deep. Then she drank her hot chocolate and went to do her homework. I thought about that conversation for 11 hours above the Atlantic Ocean. And I wondered when my daughter had started carrying pain she didn't know how to put down. And I wondered when she had decided the closest person to hand it to was me. The plane landed at 6 in the morning. The airport was that particular shade of tired that airports always are before the rest of the world wakes up. Half the lights humming, half the shops still shuttered, travelers moving like people who have temporarily forgotten what country they belong to. I collected my one bag from the carousel. I straightened my back. I walked through the arrival's door into the pale, honest light of a morning that did not know yet what it was going to contain. I had told Miriam I was arriving today. I had not told her what time. I took a taxi alone. The driver was a young man who asked me if I had enjoyed my travels, and I said yes, very much. And he told me about his own mother, who had always wanted to go to Europe but never managed it. And I listened to him the whole way and thought about how strange it is that strangers sometimes carry exactly the conversation you needed without knowing they are doing it. We turned onto Acacia Street. I saw the sign from half a block away. For sale. Big, red, planted in my garden like a declaration of war, right beside the lemon tree that Ezekiel's mother had carried 3 hours on a bus wrapped in newspaper. Right beside the roses I had planted the first spring we moved in. Right there, in the garden I had tended for 23 years, like a flag planted by someone who had decided this territory now belonged to them. I paid the driver. I stood on the pavement. I looked at my house, my blue door, my windows, my 23 years. And then I walked up the path, and I put my key in the lock, and it did not turn. And I rang the bell. And Miriam opened the door in a yellow dress. Always the yellow dress, as though she was perpetually on her way to a celebration. And Solomon stood behind her with his arms crossed, and the whole terrible scene unfolded exactly as I told you in the beginning. You already know what happened at the door. What you do not know is what happened inside me. Because while Solomon was talking, while he was explaining debts and dangerous people and the practicalities of my sudden homelessness with the casual confidence of a man who has never once in his life been held accountable for anything, something very quiet and very certain was happening in my chest. It was the feeling of a woman who already knows the ending. It is, I want to tell you, one of the most powerful feelings available to a human being. I smiled. I left. I walked back down the path and past the lemon tree without touching it this time, because some things you only need to touch once, and I had said my goodbye to it 3 months ago. I got into another taxi, and I gave the driver Deborah's address, and I did not look back at my house, not once, because looking back at things you are about to reclaim is a waste of good energy. Deborah was already at her office when I arrived. This did not surprise me. Deborah Annan is the kind of woman who is always already there. She opened her door before I could knock, handed me a cup of tea before I could ask, and sat me down across from her desk with the calm efficiency of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. How did they look? She asked. Like people who think they've won, I said. She smiled. Good. Overconfidence is a very useful thing in an opponent. She opened a file on her desk. Ruth, I need to walk you through exactly where we are, because the next 72 hours are going to move fast, and I want you to be steady when they do. I am already steady, I told her. She looked at me over her glasses in that way she has. Not quite a smile, something more serious than a smile. Something that looks like respect. I know you are, she said. But listen anyway. She laid it out cleanly, the way she always did. The house transfer into the living trust had been registered and documented 5 weeks before I left the country. Miriam had used the power of attorney to authorize the sale of a property listed under my personal name, Ruth Abigail Manoah. But the property had already been moved. It no longer existed under that name. What Miriam had sold, in the eyes of the law, was heir. The buyer, a property developer named Hanson, who had paid $260,000 in cash, was currently holding a deed to something he did not actually own. His lawyers would discover this within days. When they did, they would go after Miriam and Solomon for the return of their money. And Miriam and Solomon, who had already used a significant portion of those funds to pay down Solomon's gambling debts, would find themselves in a position that no charm and no yellow dress could fix. Gambling debts, I said quietly. I had suspected, but hearing it confirmed settled into me like a stone into still water. Deborah nodded. Our investigator confirmed it last week. It was not investment losses, Ruth. It was casinos, private card games, loans from people who do not accept apologies. Solomon Dathan has been in serious financial trouble for nearly 2 years, and he has been managing it by borrowing from increasingly dangerous sources. Your house was not a last resort. She paused. It was a deliberate plan. We have evidence that he and Miriam discussed it at least 8 months ago. 8 months. 8 months before the trip, before the power of attorney, before the roses and the tea and the 2 bright smiles. They had already decided. They had already chosen. I want to tell you that I was surprised. But the truth is that the body knows before the mind admits it. And my body had known for a long time. I asked Deborah what came next. She told me. We would file a report with the police. Fraud. Forgery. Because Solomon had forged 2 supporting documents in the sale. Misuse of a power of attorney. The DA's office had already been informally briefed. An official complaint would trigger an investigation within 48 hours. Miriam and Solomon's accounts would be flagged. The sale money, whatever remained, would be frozen. And the house? I asked. Yours, she said simply. The sale is void. It always was. You never stopped owning it. I sat with that for a moment. I never stopped owning it. 23 years of early mornings and careful savings, and Ezekiel spinning me in a parking lot, and a child named Miriam growing up inside those walls. Nobody had taken it. Nobody had been able to. Because I had stood in this same office 6 weeks ago and done the one quiet, invisible, powerful thing that made the whole plan fall apart before it ever had a chance to succeed. I thought about Solomon's face at my door. That winning look. I thought about Miriam not meeting my eyes. And then I thought about something that has no clean answer. The thing that was already sitting in my chest, even as I sat in Deborah's office with justice laid out neatly in folders on her desk. The thing I had been trying not to think about the entire flight home. What happens to Miriam? Deborah read my face the way good lawyers read everything, carefully and without judgment. She said, Ruth, whatever you decide about your daughter personally is a separate matter from what the law decides. You don't have to choose between protecting yourself and having complicated feelings about her. You're allowed to have both. I know, I said. But did I really? I left Deborah's office at noon, and I walked for a long time. Just walked, the way I used to walk when Ezekiel was alive and we needed to clear our heads. Down past the market where I had shopped every Saturday for 20 years. Past the church where Miriam was baptized, where Ezekiel's funeral was held, where I had sat alone in a pew every Sunday for 8 years talking to God in the particular way you talk to someone you trust even when you are furious with them. Past the school where I had taught children to read for 30 years. Past the ordinary life I had built and lived and loved. I walked until I could see clearly. And what I saw when I was finally clear enough to see it broke my heart in a new and specific way. I saw a woman who had spent her entire life loving her daughter so much that she had made it too easy. Too safe. I had caught every fall so quickly that Miriam had never learned to trust her own feet. I had fixed every problem so completely that she never developed the muscle you grow only when you are forced to sit with consequences. I had given her so much of myself that somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as a person separate from what I could provide. I am not saying it was my fault. I want to be very clear about that. What Solomon did was Solomon's doing. What Miriam chose was Miriam's choice. Every person owns their choices. That does not change. But I am a woman who believes in honesty, and the honest thing is this. I had loved her in a way that perhaps taught her, without meaning to, that my love had no limits and therefore no consequences. That I would always be there. That I would always forgive. That no matter what she did, Mama Ruth would open her arms and hold her through it. She had tested that belief. And now she was about to find out that love can be bottomless and still have a boundary. That a mother can grieve her child and still refuse to be destroyed by her. My phone rang as I turned the corner back toward the street where I was staying with my friend Esther, who had offered her spare room without asking any questions at all because that is the kind of friend Esther is, the kind you spend 40 years being grateful for. It was Miriam. I looked at the screen for 4 full rings. I answered. Mama. Her voice was strange. Stretched thin. I have been calling you since this morning. I know, I said. We need to talk. Please. Something is, she stopped. Her breath was uneven. I could hear her trying to compose herself, trying to find the version of her voice that still sounded in control. Solomon says it is all a misunderstanding. He says. Miriam, I said. She stopped. I said her name quietly, the way I used to say it when she was small and frightened, and I needed her to be still and listen. I said it like a hand placed gently on a shoulder. I said it the way you say the name of someone you are about to tell a very hard truth. The documents were filed this morning, I said. By tomorrow, the police will be involved. I did not make this happen. You made this happen. I only made sure that when it happened to you and not to me. Silence. The kind of silence that is not empty but full. Full of everything she could not say and everything I had already said and the vast, unbridgeable distance between who we had been to each other and who we were now. Mama, please, she finally whispered. Please don't do this to me. And I felt it then. I felt the old pull. The one that had lived in my chest her whole life. The one that said she is yours, she came from your body. She called you Mama before she could say anything else. I felt it like a hand around my heart, squeezing. But I also felt Deborah's voice. You're allowed to have both. And I felt Ezekiel's quietness. That full quietness of his. And I felt 67 years of planting things I never got to eat alone. Miriam, I said. I love you. I have always loved you. There is nothing you could do that would make me stop loving you. But love is not the same as permission. And this time I cannot catch the fall. I hung up. I stood on the pavement outside Esther's front door with the afternoon light falling at that particular angle it reaches in late October, long and golden and a little sad, the way beautiful things often are. I breathed in. I breathed out. And somewhere across the city, in an office Miriam didn't know about, in a file she had never seen, the machinery of consequence was already turning. It had been turning since before I boarded that plane. And it would not stop now. The police came for Solomon on a Friday morning. I know this because Naomi called me. She had heard it from a neighbor on Acacia Street who had watched two officers walk up to my blue front door at 8:15 in the morning, ring the bell, and wait with the patient, unhurried stillness of people who already know the person inside has nowhere to go. Solomon opened the door in a bathrobe. I have thought about that detail more than I probably should. Solomon Dathan, who never once appeared in my home without an expensive suit and a watch that cost more than my monthly pension. Solomon, who always stood with his arms crossed and his chin slightly lifted, like a man auditioning for the role of someone important. Standing at my door in a bathrobe at 8:15 on a Friday morning, looking at two police officers holding paperwork with his name on it. Naomi said the neighbors could hear Miriam screaming from inside the house before they even brought out the handcuffs. I did not feel happy when I heard this. I want to be honest about that, because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves a clean, satisfying emotion. I did not feel the rush of victory that people expect when justice arrives. What I felt was something heavier. Something that had grief mixed into it alongside the relief. The way river water always carries a little mud, even when it runs clear. I felt it because I heard Miriam screaming. And no matter what she had done, she was still the child who had once sat at my kitchen table with a cup of hot chocolate, asking why people said mean things to people they didn't know. I sat with that feeling in Esther's spare room for a long time. Esther brought me breakfast and sat across from me without talking, which is one of the great and underrated gifts one human being can offer another. She poured my tea. She buttered my bread. She let the silence be what it needed to be. Finally I said, "He's been arrested." She nodded. She already knew. Word travels fast when it travels on a street. "And Miriam?" Esther asked. "Still at the house," I said. "For now." Esther looked at me carefully, the way she has looked at me for 40 years, with the particular attention of a woman who knows you well enough to see the thing you are not saying. She asked, "What are you going to do about your daughter, Ruth?" I picked up my tea. I held it in both hands the way I always do, because there is something about the warmth of a cup that reminds you that small comforts are still real even when large things are falling apart. "I don't know yet," I said. And that was the most truthful thing I had said in weeks. The legal proceedings moved quickly, the way Deborah had said they would. Solomon was charged with fraud, forgery of documents, and criminal conspiracy. The property developer Hanson, who had paid $260,000 in cash for a house that was never legally for sale, had already retained his own legal team, and they were furious in the specific, expensive way that only people who have lost large amounts of money can be furious. His lawyers were cooperating fully with the investigation because it was in their interest to do so, and cooperation of that kind, Deborah told me, is worth more than any confession. Miriam was charged as a co-conspirator. She was not arrested. She was served a summons. There is a difference, legally, though I am not sure it felt like a difference to her. She had to appear before a magistrate within 10 days. She had to retain a lawyer. She had to stand in a room and have her choices read back to her in official language, in front of strangers, on the record. Deborah told me all of this in her office on a Monday, for days after Solomon's arrest, while I sat across from her desk and held another cup of tea and listened to the architecture of consequence being laid out brick by brick. "And the house?" I asked again. I needed to hear it again. Some things you need to hear more than once before they feel real. "The house is yours, Ruth," Deborah said. "Completely, cleanly, legally yours. We are filing for the formal dismissal of the fraudulent sale this week. Hanson's team is not contesting it. Their issue is with Solomon, not with you. Within 30 days, every cloud on that title will be gone." She paused. "You can go home whenever you are ready. Go home." 2 words that should be simple. 2 words that most people say a dozen times a week without thinking about them at all. But when you have been locked out of your own front door, when you have stood on the path of your own garden with a useless key in your hand and heard your daughter's husband tell you that you are homeless now. Those two words become the most complicated and the most beautiful words in the English language. I went home on a Wednesday. Deborah arranged for a locksmith to restore the original lock. My lock, the one that had lived in that door for 11 years, that my key had turned 10,000 times. Naomi met me there and stood on the pavement while the locksmith worked. Not because she needed to, but because she understood that some moments should not be witnessed alone. When the locksmith handed me the key and stepped aside, I stood in front of my blue door for a moment. Just a moment. I looked at the paint I had chosen, that deep particular blue, the color of water at dusk. I looked at the roses along the path, a little overgrown now, a little wild from 3 months without tending. I looked at the lemon tree, taller than the fence, the same as it had always been, unchanged and unhurried by everything that had happened around it. Ezekiel's mother had carried that tree 3 hours on a bus wrapped in newspaper. Some things outlast the worst of what we put them through. I put my key in the lock. It turned. I pushed the door open. The smell of my own home came out to meet me. That particular combination of old wood and the lavender I kept in the hallway, and 23 years of a life lived fully inside these walls. I stood in the doorway and breathed it in and felt something loosen in my chest that had been pulled tight since the morning I first saw the for sale sign from a cab window in Paris. Naomi was crying on the pavement behind me. I was not, but it was a very near thing. I went inside. I opened every window. I let the October air move through the rooms, through the kitchen and the bedroom, and the living room where Ezekiel's chair still sat by the window, where I had sat with my daughter through every version of her childhood. I stood in the kitchen, and I put my hands flat on the counter the way I have always done when I need to feel something solid, and I said out loud to nobody and everybody, "I am home." The house said nothing back, but it didn't need to. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in that same kitchen when I heard a knock at the door. Soft, uncertain, the knock of someone who is not sure they have the right to knock at all. I already knew who it was before I opened it, because the body always knows. The body carries the memory of every person it has ever loved, and it recognizes them even before the mind catches up. Miriam was standing on my path. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a month. No yellow dress, no careful makeup, no performance of a woman who had everything arranged just so. She was wearing an old gray coat I recognized from years ago, her hair pulled back simply, her eyes the same eyes I had looked into the day she was born, wide and dark and searching, the same way they were when she was a baby and the world was very large, and I was the thing she looked at to understand whether it was safe. She was not safe now. She knew that. And she was here anyway. "Mama," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know I have no right to be here. I know you don't have to open this door." But she stopped, pressed her lips together. "Tried again. I needed to see you. I needed you to know that I know what I did. Not the legal version. Not the charges. I mean, I know what I did to you. To us." I looked at her for a long time. All the speeches I had prepared dissolved. Every careful word I had arranged in my head over the previous weeks fell away. Because she was not performing. She was not managing me or measuring me or calculating what version of sorry would cost her the least. She was just standing on my path in an old gray coat with shaking hands and the face of a woman who had burned something irreplaceable and was only now understanding what fire actually destroys. I stepped back from the door. I did not say come in. I did not say I forgive you. I did not open my arms the way I would have once, automatically, reflexively, before I understood that open arms without boundaries are not love. They are just a door left unlocked for anyone to walk through. I stepped back, and I left the space for her to decide whether to cross it. She crossed it. She sat at my kitchen table. The same table, the same chairs, the same light coming through the same window. And she cried in a way I had not seen her cry since she was very small. Not pretty crying. The ugly, honest kind that comes from somewhere below words. And I sat across from her, and I did not touch her, and I did not tell her it was okay, because it was not okay, and she deserved the truth of that. But I also did not leave, because she was still mine. That would never stop being true, no matter what either of us had done with it. When she was quiet, I said, "I do not know what we are now, Miriam. I do not know if we can be repaired. That is the honest truth. But I know that you are going to stand in that courtroom, and you are going to face what you chose, and you are going to come out the other side of it one way or another. And what you do after, who you decide to be after, that is the only thing that will tell us whether there is anything left to rebuild. She nodded. She was looking at her hands. I need you to know something, she said quietly. Solomon told me you would never find out. He said the power of attorney covered everything, that by the time you came back there would be nothing you could do. He said she stopped. She swallowed. He said that you were old, and that old people get confused, and that if you made trouble no one would believe you anyway. The room was very still. He was wrong, I said. About all of it. I know, she whispered. I know that now. She looked up at me then, really looked, the way she used to when she was 7 years old sitting across this same table. And she asked the question that had probably been living in her throat since the morning the officers knocked on my blue door. Mama, why didn't you just let them? Why didn't you take the money they offered, or find somewhere else to live, or why did you fight so hard? I looked at my daughter. This complicated, broken, beloved, disappointing, irreplaceable person sitting at my kitchen table. Because your father worked until his heart gave out for this house, I said. Because my mother cleaned other people's floors so I could stand on my own. Because 6 years of saying no to everything the world was selling bought these walls, and they belong to me, and to you, and to every person who comes after us who might need to know that something was built here with love and held here with dignity. Because if I had walked away, she stopped me. She put her face in her hands. Because if I had walked away, I said gently, I would have taught you that what we build can be taken. And I refused to teach you that. Even now. Even after everything. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the lemon tree moved in the October wind. Inside, 2 women sat at a table with a long road behind them and an uncertain one ahead. And the only thing they knew for certain was that they were still, despite everything, mother and daughter. That does not fix everything. Some things cannot be fixed. But some things, the deepest, most stubborn things, the things planted in love and tended through every season, have a way of surviving what should have killed them. I have lived 67 years on this earth. I have buried a husband and raised a child and cleaned offices in the dark and taught children to read words that would outlast me, and saved every penny and signed every paper, and stood at my own locked door without flinching. And I have learned this, above all else. What is truly yours cannot be taken. Not by a man in a bathrobe. Not by a forged signature. Not by a yellow dress and a winning smile. Not even by the people who know exactly where to cut, because they were raised inside your love. What is yours, truly yours? The dignity, the truth, the house your husband spun you in front of, the lemon tree older than your grief. It waits for you. It always waits. You just have to be brave enough to go back and claim it. I am Ruth Abigail Manoah. I am 67 years old. I am home, and I am not going anywhere. This is the end of Ruth's story. But if it moved you, if you carried any part of it home with you today, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Leave a comment and tell us what moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because some stories are not just stories. Some stories are mirrors. And the most important thing a mirror can do is show you that you are still standing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. We will see you in the next one.